Gerald Celente joins me to help make sense of the current market volatility and all the geoeconomic uncertainty. Gerald is director of the Trends Research Institute. His team produces the Trends Journal with cutting-edge analysis of the global economic trends. Welcome back, Gerald.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris.
Let's start off, if we could, sir, with Ron Paul's latest attempt to fix what ails Washington. You know, in a speech on Capitol Hill, Dr. Paul held up a 1-ounce silver coin, said that it would buy 4 gallons of gasoline in 2006, but today a silver ounce only buys 11 gallons. Wouldn't you agree that it's doubtful Dr. Bernanke, though, is taking Dr. Paul's advice to buy silver?
Oh, of course it is. This is Ben Bernanke who questions whether or not gold is money. Let's not forget, it is not in the best interest of any of the central banks for the value of gold to continue to rise. They're doing everything they can do to drive down the price. So when you're looking, for example, at why gold prices should be going up and they're not, well, let's look at oil prices, as you mentioned, gasoline prices, and how they've catapulted over the last 2 months. And then let us take a look also at what's going on with the Iranian conflict. And Iran, of course, has been shut out of the banking system because of sanctions by the United States and the European Union. So what does that mean? Well, it means that Iran is now telling its customers, such as India and China, that they could buy their oil with gold. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Well, not if you keep driving down the price of gold, does it? So I believe there are a number of reasons why, primarily the one that the fiat paper, as I say, isn't worth the digital paper it's not printed on. They don't want gold prices to go higher. And secondly, because of the intrinsic value and its store value that never goes away throughout history, in the history of civilization. So they're going to continue to discourage people from buying it, have more MF Global schemes to dissuade people from going into the market, and also, as I mentioned, with incidents like Iran.
You mentioned that Ben Bernanke doesn't fully, accept that precious metals are money, and he has some interesting company there. You may have heard, with all due respect to Warren Buffett's incredible track record as an investor, he recently announced that precious metals are not money as well. And it seems to me that there is this pervasive mindset that must be overcome by even some of the more established people in finance and economics.
He's a money junkie. The guy knows how to, do deals. I mean, let's call it what it is. I mean, the wonderful Warren Buffett, for what? And you listen to what he has to say. What motivates most gold purchasers is their belief that the ranks of the fearful will grow. That's what he wrote in his February 25th on the website. During the past decade, that belief proved correct. Beyond that, the rising price has its own general additional buying enthusiasm, attracting purchasers who see the rise as validating an investment thesis. As bandwagon investors join any party, they create their own truth for a while. So now let's put this into perspective. What did gold go up? Since 2000, when Buffett starts talking about it a decade ago? How much is it up? What, 5-fold? How much is Buffett's investments up since that time? Probably a lot less. So anybody be knocking gold. If you just made that one investment, you wouldn't have to do everything that Warren Buffett does. So what it is, when you read what they say, again, while he won't buy gold, and it doesn't dissuade anybody that's been seeing what's going on that, gold has gone up nearly 5-fold. And his investments haven't gone up that much. So why would anybody believe him? Because it comes from Warren Buffett. And when he says things like, well, you could use land, but you can't do anything with a big chunk of gold, doesn't he get it? You turn your gold in, and you get the currency of the realm to use to make purchases. So what they're doing is he's part of the central bank money junkie scheme. He's in the dollars. He doesn't want to see gold prices go higher.
You know, he has the Graham mentality there, where if this asset does not produce an income stream, I can't value it. It really is the heart of the fundamental and value investor mantra. He divested himself of what was considered to be a quarter of the world's silver stockpile at the time. And since then, silver is up about, as you say, fivefold, from $8 to, in the neighborhood of $30, $40.
And then he makes this other statement: you can fondle the cube, talking about gold, but it will not respond. And look, what kind of non sequitur is that? Come on, what are you talking about? This is kiddie talk. What it is, it's there to dissuade people from taking the future in their own hands. It's dissuading people from having a vision beyond the narrow stock vision of the money junkies. So that's all this is.
It's hard, I think, to convince someone who has made a fortune using one methodology to suddenly toss all that out the window. Next, Congressman Paul lectured the Fed chairman later on, saying that gold is what the money has always said it should be, and that's money. He says money comes into effect a natural way, not by edicts or by fiat or by government declaring it's money for these officials to wrap their minds around.
Yes, and Ron Paul also makes the point about how much the dollar has devalued since the money changers have taken over the Temple of Washington. The Federal Reserve's taken over. What is it, worth less than 95% of what it used to be?
And, it's interesting you should mention that, because Dr. Paul lectured Ben Bernanke later on inflation. He said the Fed has, in the last 6 years, destroyed the value of real money. And I agree with Dr. Paul, but I would interpolate his comments and point out the Fed has been destroying purchasing power not just 6 years, but as you point out, about 99 to 100 years now.
And let's look at some other facts, because at the end of the day, that's all that counts. Let's go back 10 years ago. Well, how much was a barrel of oil? And what's it as we speak, around 122? And how much was an ounce of gold? What, about $280 an ounce? And what is it now? Around the 1,700 mark? So who are these guys kidding with this baloney of theirs? This isn't gold bugs. These are intelligent people that Noah Bernanke, who should have been, too bad Coney Island's not still going. Put your money down.
All right, well, clearly traders were nonplussed, Gerald, with the lack of QE3 talk by the Fed chairman. Last week he failed to drop even a hint of future stimulus. Perhaps that's because he's too busy with his clandestine operations, buying up treasury bills around the world. What do you think?
You're exactly right. And also the other not-so-clandestine operation coming from the European Central Bank. And look what they're doing. They had, their wonderful head of the ECB, Mario Draghi, the former vice chairman of European division of Goldman Sachs. They dumped just before Christmas. They dumped what? About $600 billion into the banks so they could borrow. I love the language, LTRO, long-term. Long-term refinancing operation. And what they're doing is banks could borrow at 1%. And they could park the money in the bank and get 25% back. So now they're down to 75%. And they don't have to pay it back if it's 3 years. And borrow as much as you want to keep the Ponzi scheme going. So we have, and this, by the way, is against the European Monetary Union Charter. This is another scam. And I always say this: the word justice, the laws, it's being spelled wrong. It's J-U-S-T-U-S, just us. They make up the rules as they go along. And the rule is this: we're going to give you bankers, you money changers, all the money you need. Buy up our worthless bonds over there in Italy and Portugal and Ireland and Greece and the rest of the Eurozone where they're not worth much money. Make it seem as though there's a recovery. So, yes, it's clandestine operations, and that's what's keeping this apart. And then if you read the new headlines coming out, check this one out. Bernanke's not that cool. Bernanke's going to take a risk, and if inflation rises. Inflation's been going through the roof, and we just went through the numbers. When you look at oil 10 years ago at $20 a barrel, and when you look at gold 10 years ago at $280 an ounce, and here's the clincher. Median household income in the United States is below 1999 levels.
As you may know, the CPI has that housing component, and it apparently has been pushing down on the official inflation numbers while they're hedonically removing the only thing that really matters to 98% of Americans, and that's food and energy costs. They have limo drivers that are paying their gas bills.
You know, what's wrong with you? You don't need food and fuel. I just got a little while ago. I just got, a fuel delivery. We have heating oil back here in the East. It was almost $1,000 for about a 300-gallon tank. I don't know how much they put in there. And, knock on wood and spit, as they say, I can afford it. But there were times in my life when I would have seen the guy coming up with the oil truck when I didn't have the money. And how about all of these people that are on fixed incomes, all of the elderly, all of the people that are scrounging to make ends meet? And and food and fuel are not put into the core inflation index? Again, step right up. I'm Ben Bernanke, right here in Coney Island. He didn't give you 3 balls to knock over the bottles. I mean, it's all this is.
Another interesting aspect is that we're approaching 50 million Americans now require food stamps, which is, now you just swipe a nice little debit card. No one's the wiser getting your groceries. But still, it's a startling statistic to think that nearly 1 in 6 Americans require government subsidies or assistance to put food on the table. And as you pointed out, it's the people who have the fixed incomes who have worked hard and deserve to have some peace in the golden years who are hit the hardest on this, and not to mention the working classes. And they don't have a voice. And because there's no voice and because there's no true democracy, that's where we find ourselves. Wanted to move on, if we could, to Chairman Bernanke. He pontificated later in the week about government fiscal irresponsibility. He said our politicians are sending the economy over a massive fiscal cliff. I doubt the irony of Mr. Bernanke lecturing Congress on government profligacy is lost on you, Gerald.
The whole thing is such a charade. And when you talk about the difficulty that elderly people are having, Bernanke keeps interest rates at near zero. And in the old days, people that didn't want to take risk could put their money in the bank and get a modest return on it that would keep them ahead of inflation. And you can't do that anymore. So these guys all talk a big game. It's disgusting what's going on. You talked about all the people on food stamps, that the mass amount of people that have jobs that are paying nothing with no future in front of them, and the difficulty in feeding a family. And then you look at somebody like Newt Gingrich, and that cat is, just as you look at him, man, he's been feeding off the public trough for probably all of his life, and he makes stupid statements like, these young protesters should go take a bath and get a job. That shows you the disconnect. If Newt Gingrich never had another thing to eat for the rest of his life, he has enough stock in there to make it through. But yet he tells other people who are starving. And this is a guy that, as I said, he gets these couple of $1 million jobs through the insider deals within Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and others, telling other people that they're just lazy. No, the whole system is breaking down. And what you're seeing is third world behavior coming from our government. That's the way they act when you have a gap between the rich and the poor, as we have in the United States, that's the widest in any of the industrialized nations.
Well, at least China's central bank is taking steps to protect the hoi polloi from a dollar collapse. Sources indicate that the Bank of China continues to divest its massive $1 trillion stockpile of U.S. Treasuries. The Treasury Department reported that China's holdings of Treasury securities declined by nearly 10% in just the fourth quarter, down to just over $1.1 trillion. Soon, Japan is going to overtake China as our largest creditor. Maybe someone needs to start a Bank of China following hedge fund, Gerald.
China's in a rough spot. They have to keep the Ponzi scheme going, too. If Americans don't buy, and the only way Americans buy is if the Chinese loan us money, they don't manufacture. If the Europeans don't buy stuff, the Chinese don't manufacture. And you're seeing the fallout already, because as we've been writing in the Trends Journal, if the Chinese don't manufacture, the Brazilians, the Australians, the Chileans, and other natural resource countries, they don't export. So now we're seeing the slowdown starting to happen. But I've been in this business now since 1980, and I'm always marveled at the schemes undreamed of that they come up with. So when things should collapse, they often don't, because they come up with another scheme. So here's the scheme undreamed of that I believe is going to be America's worst nightmare. And that's war with Iran. The drums keep beating, the chicken hawks keep screeching, and America and Israel keep getting closer to a conflict with Iran. And it's all tied in with Syria as well. So it's very important that people stay abreast of the current events that are forming future trends and get past the language of lies that the media uses to spin an event and an occurrence in the direction that they want. And we're saying right now that a war with Iran is going to be the beginning of World War III, but what it will do, Chris, it will certainly get the people's mind off the failing economy, just as it did during the Great Depression in the lead-up to World War II. Again, I do not give financial advice. I'm just about totally invested in gold mostly and some silver. And that's I keep buying it and believing in it. And again, I don't buy it to speculate. For me, gold is for my golden years.
I think that's the best advice that you can give. Just tell people what you're doing with your hard-earned dineros, and it sounds to me like you've parked them in the best place possible. Had
it not been for gold, when I had my ups and downs, and believe me, they've been there, because there was a time, particularly in 2003, after I had forecast, and it's in USA Today, anybody could go see it. Go to our website, trendsjournal.com, go to the forecast page and see terrorism. And it was in USA Today on December 14th when I warned that Americans wouldn't be safe at home or abroad, and that there was going to be something that was going to rattle the nation in 2001 like never before. So when the media started calling me up and asking me why it happened, what was behind 9/11, and I told them foreign policy, I should have had my head examined. I should have been following the kitty line. If they hated our freedom and liberty, of course I should have known that. You're either with us or you're with the terrorists. So I had my bad time. I used to be on Oprah, The Today Show, CNN, ABC, you name it. But when I said after that the Afghan war and the Iraq war would be long-term and costly losers, they didn't like that either. So you know my motto, Chris, think for yourself. Because in the end, that's all it's about. It's about having courage, respect, and dignity to live your life in the highest moral manner possible. And when you can let all this other stuff go on around you, as long as enough people change and change for the better, then everything will change. Because the only thing we can expect from our leaders is small change or no change or great doses of hopium.
And if you count on them to solve your problems, you will end up with no change in your pocket.
That's right.
Please, sir, tell our listeners today how they can find out more about your work and pick up a copy of the Trends Journal.
Trendsjournal.com, trendsjournal.com. They could go to our website. Oh, by the way, we have our 2011, last year's trends posted, top trends, for a preview that they could look at. And as I say, think for yourself. But we can guarantee you that no one out there could take you into the future better than we can for the information that we provide, the trend posts and the opportunities that lie ahead, and the pitfalls to avoid in these coming difficult economic and geopolitical times.
Thank you, sir, and we'll look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you, Chris. Always great being on with you.